It's been a little over 8 years since my dad passed away. We were incredibly close. He always called me his little girl, even when I acted out or misbehaved. Whenever I lashed out, he would approach me with a warm smile, making sure I found my way back. He'd ruffle my hair, crack one of his corny dad jokes, and bring me my favorite snacks when I was having a rough day. When someone broke my heart, he'd hug me tight and remind me how strong and amazing I was. My dad was my hero. I never once thought anything could happen to him, until his strong, broad frame became thin and fragile. His booming laughter was replaced by wet, rattling coughs, and his bright blue eyes lost their sparkle. My mom and I were a mess, but just like he had always been there for me during tough times, I stayed by his side through his struggle. Even as he lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines, he'd still ruffle my hair and tell me one of his jokes. The days he spent in the hospital dragged on like months. I remember the sterile smell of antiseptic, the constant beeping of machines, and the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Each day felt like a battle, and I was determined to be his cheerleader. I would bring him his favorite books, hoping to distract him from the pain. "Hey Dad, remember that time we went camping and you tried to catch a fish with your bare hands?" I'd laugh, trying to bring back the sparkle in his eyes. He'd chuckle weakly. I think the fish were more scared of me than I was of them. But as the days turned into weeks, I could see the toll it was taking on him. His laughter faded, and the light in his eyes dimmed. I felt helpless, watching the man who had always been my rock become a shadow of himself. Finally, the day came when his condition became critical. I was there, holding his hand as his life began to fade away. "Please don't leave me," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I won't make it through this world without you." He looked at me and smiled, a single tear rolling down his cheek as he reached out to wipe mine. "I'm not going anywhere, baby," he whispered, his voice soft but steady. The days that followed didn't feel real. On the day of his funeral, I wished desperately that all of it had been just a terrible, long dream. Sitting in the front row, right next to my dad's open casket, I listened to my uncle give the eulogy. But I couldn't cry anymore. I couldn't feel anything anymore. The words of comfort and sympathy from others felt like muffled static in my ears. I withdrew into my room, unable to face the world, while my mom tried her best to move forward as a single parent to a teenage daughter. I could see the pain in her eyes, the way she forced a smile for my sake. In the depths of my grief-stricken sleep, I began to dream of my dad. He would appear at the foot of my bed, standing there, watching over me. He looked just as he had when he was alive, healthy and vibrant. "Dad, I miss you so much," I would say, my voice trembling. He'd flash me that familiar warm smile. "I need you to stay," I'd plead. He would place a hand on my cheek and repeat those words. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." When I woke up, I could still feel the warmth of his hand on my face. After settling into my college life, I often found myself thinking about my dad and wondering if he was still there in the house. The thought nagged at me, and as soon as I had a break in my schedule, I rushed back home to visit. My mom welcomed me with a big hug, and her now fiance gave me an awkward smile. "Your room is just as you left it," my mom assured me, her voice filled with a mix of nostalgia and sadness. Thanking her, I hurried upstairs, my heart racing with anticipation. But the moment I opened the door, I let out a startled yelp. I had almost forgotten. Sitting on my bed was my dad. At first, I froze in shock, but then I noticed something horrifying. He looked different, a lot different. His once strong and warm appearance was gone, replaced by a skeletal, frail frame. His pale skin was bruised and stretched thin over his bones. He looked at me, his eyes empty and hollow, and slowly shuffled toward me. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I couldn't move, frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. As he got closer, the air around him turned icy cold, and I could see my breath fog between us. There was a stench, one of rot and decay, that filled the room as he approached. Forcing the word out, I called out, "Dad?" But the creature that once was my father didn't respond like before. Instead, he raised a bony, decaying hand and placed it on my head. His face loomed close, and I realized with growing horror that his eyes were gone, just black. Empty sockets stared back at me. His mouth cracked and creaked as he opened it, and then I heard it, his voice, but warped and distorted like a broken record. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." The putrid stench of his breath hit my face, and I had to choke back the bile rising in my throat. Then he turned and slowly shuffled past me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I ran to the bathroom, where I vomited into the toilet, trembling from the encounter. My mom came to check on me, but I lied, telling her I must have eaten something bad. That night, my mom was making plans for my stay, but I told her that something urgent had come up and I needed to return to university. She was sad, but she understood. I couldn't tell her the truth, that the ghost of my dad was haunting the house and that he was changing into something monstrous. The guilt was unbearable. I couldn't stop wondering if this was somehow my fault. I stayed away from the house for years after that, throwing myself into college and my new life. By the time I graduated, I had a good job, my own apartment, and my mom had remarried. We both moved on, but the memories of that night haunted me. Then one day, I got a message from my mom saying she was moving into a new house and had left my belongings behind for me to sort out. With hesitation, I agreed to come back and clear out my things. Pulling up to the house after all those years, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread. As I stepped up to the front door, it felt unnervingly cold despite the warm afternoon. When I walked in, the air inside the house felt heavy and dark. Fumbling along the wall for the light switch, my hands brushed against a surface so cold it numbed my fingers. Finally, I found the switch and flipped it on. The house was almost completely empty. My mom had wasted no time packing everything up. But as I walked cautiously down the hallway toward my old room, a strange noise stopped me in my tracks. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was faint at first, like something heavy falling. Holding my breath, I tried to focus on the noise. Thump, thump. My body began to shake, whether from fear or the lingering cold, I wasn't sure. But then it got louder. Thump, 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 thump. Whatever it was getting closer and fast. I panicked and sprinted toward the front door. But before I could reach it, something seemed to pull me back. My head hit the door as I fell to the ground. I screamed, clawing at the vinyl flooring, kicking wildly until finally whatever had me let go. I scrambled like a desperate animal toward the door, every muscle in my body aching. But then I heard it, a low, guttural voice that sent a frozen jolt of terror down my spine. Not going anywhere. Against my better judgment, I turned around, and there it was, a shadowy figure that resembled someone I used to know. The figure pressed its cold hand against my face, its sharp nails raking up to my hairline. I felt warm blood trickle down as pain shot through me, and I cried harder. The figure tilted its head, as if confused by my reaction, before using its other hand to tear at itself. The sound of ripping filled the room, making my stomach turn. I watched in horror as it extended something toward me, its presence overwhelming. I shook my head frantically, refusing to let it near me. Its frustration turned into an ear-piercing guttural scream, a sound so primal it sent shivers through my entire body. Closing my eyes, I mustered the courage to speak again. "Dad, I'm sorry," I whispered through tears. "It's okay now. Things are better. You need to move on. We've moved on. We're okay." For a moment, silence filled the room. I opened my eyes, and the figure was no longer looming over me. Instead, it had retreated to a dark corner of the room, its empty, hollow eyes staring at me. Then it howled again, distorted and broken, as if struggling to hold on to something. "I'm not going anywhere, baby," it growled, the voice echoing in the emptiness. Through my tears, I forced myself to look at it, really look. My voice was quiet but firm as I replied, "It's okay, you can go now." And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The room was silent, the oppressive cold gone, and I was left standing there, bloodied, bruised, and alone in the middle of the house that had once been our home. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. I had been ready for a long time. The dark, suffocating presence that had lingered over the house was gone. The air felt light again, as if the house had finally taken a breath after years of holding it in. Years have passed since that night, and it's been more than 8 years since my dad first passed away. It's been a few months now since he finally let go and moved on. Life feels different, better even. I can only hope that wherever he is now, in whatever comes after this life, he can finally heal. I hope he's whole again. But I wish I could end this story on a happier note. There's something else. I don't know what happened to my dad, whether it was my selfish wish as a little girl or the stubborn love of a father trying to protect his family. I don't know. But since that day, I've started to see other things, other people, other beings, and they're worse than my dad ever was. After that night, I began to notice shadows lurking in the corners of my vision. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But then I saw them more clearly. Figures that flicker in and out of existence, their faces twisted in anguish. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling as if I was being watched. "Mom, do you ever feel like something is in the house?" I asked one evening, my voice trembling. She looked at me, concern etched on her face. "Honey, it's just the stress of everything. You've been through a lot. Maybe you should talk to someone." But I knew it was more than that. I could feel it in my bones. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a prison, haunted by the memories of what had been lost. One night as I lay in bed, I heard a soft whispering. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. I sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Help us! Help us!" I jumped out of bed, heart racing. I followed the sound, creeping down the dark hallway. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the temperature drop. As I reached the living room, I saw them, figures hovering near the window, their faces contorted in pain. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Lost. We're lost," they echoed, their voices a haunting chorus. I stumbled back, fear gripping me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I banged on the door, desperate to escape. "Let me out, please!" I screamed. Suddenly, the figures began to coalesce into a single form, a woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. "You must help us," she pleaded, her voice echoing in my mind. "We are trapped between worlds, just like your father." "Why me?" I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "I can't help you." "You have the power to set us free," she insisted. "You must confront the darkness that binds us." I felt a surge of determination. If I could help them, maybe I could finally find peace for myself and for my dad. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice steadying. The woman guided me to the center of the living room, where the air felt charged with energy. "You must call upon the spirits, acknowledge their pain, and offer them your compassion," she instructed. "Only then can they move on." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I'm here," I said, my voice strong. "I acknowledge your pain. I'm sorry for what you've endured. You are not alone." The room began to tremble, and the shadows swirled around me. I could hear their whispers growing louder, a cacophony of sorrow and longing. "Help us! Help us! Let go of your pain," I urged, feeling the energy building within me. "You are free to move on. You deserve peace." As I spoke, the shadows began to dissolve, their forms flickering like candle flames. The woman smiled, her face softening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fading into the ether. "You have set us free." With a final burst of light, the room erupted in a brilliant glow, and then silence. The oppressive weight that had hung over the house lifted, leaving behind a sense of calm. I opened my eyes, feeling lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted from my shoulders. In the days that followed, I felt a profound change within myself. The shadows that had once haunted me were gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. I began to embrace my memories of my dad, cherishing the moments we had shared rather than dwelling on the pain of his loss. I started volunteering at a local hospice, helping others who were facing the end of their lives. I found solace in listening to their stories, offering comfort to those who were scared and alone. It was a way for me to honor my dad's memory, to carry forward the love he had given me. As I stood by the window one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a warmth envelop me. It was as if my dad was there, watching over me, proud of the person I had become. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, a smile breaking through my tears. "I'll always carry you with me." But I also knew that my journey wasn't over. The world was filled with shadows, and I had the power to help others find their light. And so I embraced my new reality, ready to face whatever came next. I had learned that love transcends even the darkest of times, and that by confronting our fears, we can find healing and hope. But there was still one lingering thought in the back of my mind. What had happened to the other beings I had encountered? Were they truly gone, or had they simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for someone else to hear their cries? As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was ready to face the future, whatever it may hold. and in the quiet of the night, I whispered a promise to myself. I would never stop helping those in need, whether they were living or lost in the shadows.